How can a machine that costs several $1 million become more valuable sitting idle than running on the rails? And why would railroads choose to leave powerful locomotives stored for years instead of selling them to willing buyers? Today, we're diving into the hidden economic logic behind these rusting giants. If you want to understand how massive industries make decisions that seem backwards but aren't, keep watching and subscribe. Every year, American railroads spend billions to keep their fleets running, but the real story of locomotive value starts on a spreadsheet, not a track. The moment a brand new $2.5 million locomotive rolls out of the factory, the clock begins ticking, not just on its mechanical life, but on its tax life. Under IRS rules, these machines are classified as 7-year property. That means railroads can write off the cost of each locomotive much faster than the engine will wear out. The system is called MACRS, the Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System, and it does not just smooth out over time, it plunges. In the first year alone, 14.29% of a locomotive's value vanishes from the books for tax purposes. On a $2.5 million engine, that is over $357,000 gone before the first winter. In year 2, the deduction jumps even higher, 24.49%. That is another $612,250 written off. By the end of year 3, the railroad has claimed nearly $1.4 million in depreciation, more than half the locomotive's original price, while the machine itself might still look and run like new. The curve continues, 17.49% in year 3, 12.49% in year 4, then just under 9% for each of the next 3 years, and a final 4.46% in year 8. By then, the tax book value is a shadow of the real engine still sitting in the yard. What looks like a slow fade is actually a steep drop, front-loaded by design. This is not an accident. It is a feature built into the tax code, meant to encourage investment by letting companies recover costs quickly. But it creates a strange effect. The financial value of a locomotive collapses on paper long before the steel and wiring show their age. Railroads do not just watch these numbers, they plan around them. Every decision about whether to keep, sell, or retire a locomotive starts with this depreciation curve. The faster the write-off, the sooner a unit becomes a candidate for storage, retirement, or even parts harvesting. And when the market value falls below the book value, a new set of incentives kicks in. For anyone curious about why powerful machines end up parked in rows, this is the heart of the puzzle. If you want to understand why big companies sometimes make choices that look wasteful from the outside but make perfect sense inside the boardroom, subscribe and join us as we keep peeling back the layers of railroad logic. Selling a locomotive is rarely as simple as cashing a check and moving on. For railroads, the tax code draws a sharp line between a quick sale and a strategic retirement, and that line runs straight through Section 1245 of the Internal Revenue Code. Locomotives are classified as personal property, and every dollar of depreciation claimed through the Modified Accelerated Cost Recovery System, MACRS, comes with a catch. If the locomotive is sold for more than its tax-adjusted book value, the difference up to that book value is recaptured as ordinary income. That means the IRS takes a 21% cut, the current federal corporate rate, right off the top. Take a 5-year-old engine that cost $2.5 million new. After accelerated depreciation, its tax basis might be just over $1 million. If the railroad sells it for $1.5 million, that $500,000 difference is not a capital gain. It is recaptured depreciation taxed at the full corporate rate. That is more than $100,000 owed in taxes, before factoring in transaction costs or any state taxes layered on top. Suddenly, the deal that looked like a win on paper starts to shrink in the ledger. But the math flips if the locomotive is retired or scrapped instead. Now, the railroad claims a loss equal to the difference between the tax basis and whatever salvage value they can recover, often just a fraction of the original price. That loss becomes a deduction against other income, creating a tax shield. For a $1 million loss, that is $210,000 saved on the company's tax bill. No recapture, no extra paperwork, just a cleaner exit and a lower effective tax rate for the year. Railroads do not make these choices in a vacuum. Tax directors run the numbers every quarter, weighing the cost of a taxable gain against the benefit of a deductible loss. In the words of one corporate tax director, abandonment delivers the tax shield with no transaction costs. The math is unambiguous. This is where the logic of locomotive storage gets sharper. The decision to park, sell, or retire is not about sentiment, or even about the hardware itself. It is a calculation shaped by the fine print of the tax code that can turn a row of rusting engines into a hidden asset. The next time you see a line of idle locomotives, remember what looks like waste may be the result of a spreadsheet doing exactly what it was designed to do. On the ground, the logic of storing locomotives comes alive in the shop, not the boardroom. At Union Pacific's Bailey Yard, the world's largest rail yard, a maintenance manager named Bailey & Conway keeps a running tally of which engines are ripe for parts. He points to a line of parked SDCs and sees not rusting hulks, but a living warehouse. When a traction motor fails on a loaded coal train, an outage that can cost tens of thousands a day in delays, the difference between waiting for a new part and pulling one from a stored unit is measured in hours, not weeks. A new traction motor from the manufacturer runs $100,000 to $250,000 and can take up to 2 months to arrive. In contrast, a swap from a stored locomotive can get a 5,000-ton train moving again the same afternoon. It's not just traction motors. Alternators, control modules, even entire truck assemblies are harvested. Each component has its own market price and lead time, but the equation is simple. The faster a repair, the less revenue lost. At Bailey Yard, one manager recalls a winter week when a string of units lost alternators. Instead of waiting for OEM shipments, the team pulled parts from storage, keeping dozens of trains on schedule. Over at Norfolk Southern's Conway shops, a similar story plays out. Stored GP and SD units serve as donor banks, feeding parts to active engines and cutting downtime from weeks to days. The economics are clear. A single retired locomotive can yield $250,000 to $320,000 in usable parts over a decade, often double what it would fetch at auction. For a railroad moving thousands of cars a day, every hour saved is worth far more than the scrap value of a parked engine. What looks like waste from the outside is, in practice, a hedge against the unpredictable. The storage line is an insurance policy, paid out in uptime and reliability. Every decision to park a locomotive faces a gauntlet of rules and risks that go far beyond dollars and bolts. Regulations, like 40 CFR Part 1033, draw a hard line because once a locomotive is rebuilt or sold, it must meet modern emissions standards. For older units, that means months of paperwork, engineering tests, and costs in the six figures just to prove compliance. Compliance specialists describe the process as a bureaucratic maze. One misstep and the sale stalls out or collapses. Even if a buyer is found, export controls step in. Under EAR 99, nearly every locomotive headed overseas needs a SNAP-R filing with the Department of Commerce. That adds weeks, sometimes months, and can kill deals before they start. Liability is the next constraint. Environmental counsel for a major railroad says that every time they let a locomotive go, they risk inheriting a lawsuit years down the line for oil, asbestos, or PCBs. If it leaks or gets mishandled, the railroad remains on the hook. That is why many railroads prefer to keep surplus units under their own control, deferring environmental risk instead of transferring it to an unknown future. The math behind storage is shockingly simple. Parking a locomotive costs about $2,800 a year, pennies compared to the cost of a compliance failure or a lawsuit. Fleet operations managers run a 3-option test: keep running the unit and absorb rising maintenance costs, sell it and risk regulatory, tax, and liability headaches, or retire and cannibalize, harvesting parts and claiming a tax loss. In most scenarios, the last option wins. Retire and cannibalize yields the highest after-tax benefit, keeps parts on hand, and avoids regulatory friction. What looks like rust is actually the outcome of a system tuned for risk, rules, and return. Today, every seemingly abandoned locomotive is a ledger entry, a parts depot, and a calculated risk. As policy and technology shift, so does the logic behind what railroads leave idle. These silent engines remind us, in modern industry, what looks like waste is often a hidden strategy. Share your take below.